This is a very moving evening for me to be here for Deepti and her book. All right, I climb up? All right, Deepti. Right. Okay, see, there you are. And it's not just, it's an honor. It's very moving for me to be here. And I don't want to talk about the book, not because I've not read it, but because they're going to be talking about it anyway. What I would like to talk about is Deepti, as very few of us are privileged, honored, and blessed to know her as a friend, first of all, and as a person who one day descended from the sky when I was sitting in Shoma Chaudhury's office, translating a play on a day off from a shoot. And suddenly she comes like a vision, and I look at her, because those were the days in the early 90s when you didn't see movie stars 50 times on television. You only saw them in magazine covers, you know, inside magazines, or you saw them in the movies. And suddenly there's this petite, lovely woman, and the question that falls on my shoulders from the back is, what are you writing? So I turn and I look and I suddenly say, oh, who's this? And it's like, then she smiled and I said, oh my God, Deepti Naval. And she lived in the same building upstairs, and she wanted to ask me what I was writing. And she said, you're Meeta and all that stuff. And I said, yes, yes, and what are you writing? So I explained to her what I was writing. So it's interesting that the first thing that she should ask me is what I'm writing, and she was interested in what I was writing. So I explained to her. Over the years, then she invited me to her house, and it was one of the most beautiful spaces I had been to. It was the kind of house I would love to have had myself. And over the years, Deepti changes that house from something that had 4 or 5 bedrooms to something that's become like a beautiful New York loft or something. And the one thing that I feel that she does all the time is, and what I've learned from her as a person, as a human being, and what I totally admire and get inspired by, is that, first of all, she's never scared of change. She's always getting rid of what is familiar, but never losing memory of it, but she manages to transform it into something of beauty. And the special thing about Deepti is that she looks for beauty in everything and everyone. She has her idiosyncrasies, which is what makes it all the more interesting and humane. And she is not afraid of admitting to them. And at the same time, she is always striving to seek that which is beautiful in life, to see the more lovely aspects of life, to always, you know, a lot of people think that being an actress is because you've acted in movies, and being a writer is because you've written a book, and being a traveler is because you took a jeep and went out into the wilderness on your own, which Deepti has done. But with Deepti, it's her curiosity for life. It's her ability to see wondrousness in everyday things. And it's also the fact that she makes a conscious choice to seek that which is beautiful and surround herself with that which is sublime and beautiful. And that is the one thing that I'm so humbled by, because I say, oh my God, but this is what life is about. And that is what makes you into somebody who can write and travel and be fearless and journey into yourself, you know? So here's looking at you, Deepti, for being an artist of life, not just an artist on stage or as a writer. You're an artist of life, and that is something that I think her friends have the privilege of being able to access, and I am actually allowing you an access to it today. So her books and her movies are just a part of the fact that she's also an artist of life, and that's what makes her the great artist she is. So I would like to welcome Deepti on stage, and Shoma Chaudhury. So this petite lady is the fearless one, and she's going to talk about this wonderful, I love this title, A Country Called Childhood. It's so beautiful, so evocative. So here, it's on to you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. It's wonderful to be here. The last time I was in this hall, it was in the middle of COVID, and there were 3.5 people here, and we were pretending that it was 3,000. So it's really lovely to see this many people here, and it's all seeming like the fogs are receding, and we're all rebirthing ourselves. So it's great to be here. It's a particular pleasure to be speaking to Deepti about her book. As Meeta said, she's an artist of life, and this is an extremely personal memoir. But in many ways, it's an intimate story, not just of herself, but of our country. And that's what's so wonderful about it, that, it's a journey back to the innocence of childhood, but it's also a journey back to the innocence of our country and the choices that all of us can make at any given time. Deepti starts the book by saying stories matter, because stories are finally what defines who you or I want to be. It's not our CVs, it's not our external achievements. Every night when you look into the mirror, you've decided a certain story for yourself. And that's the thing that really binds us. It either frees us or binds us or haunts us or makes us live by a certain tenet. And that is really our own personal stories of ourselves. And Deepti, in describing that through this book, also keeps giving glimpses of the ways in which our country chose stories for itself and the big decisions that lie before us now in how we will define the stories that our country says for itself now. Interestingly, Deepti's surname, Naval, is something that her father chose for himself. And he chose it because it means new. And he consciously made a choice to walk a path that would be completely new for himself and for his family. And in doing that, he's taken his family and Deepti, who's our common possession, down an entire journey of seeking and searching. So, there are many strands to this. It's remembrance, it's nostalgia, but as I said, at the heart of it, it is the power of storytelling. Deepti, given that she's an artist, both of the life and the canvas, it's a very tactile account, so a lot of times you feel like you're really watching a movie, and some of it is just shards of stories, but it's amazing how it resonates with hidden recesses of one's own mind. So thank you very much, Deepti, for writing this.
Thank you,
and it's
Shoma.
a pleasure here to be speaking with you.
Thank you, it's a pleasure, thank you. Thank you all for being here. It's wonderful to have all of you this evening. I'm really happy.
So, Deepti, let me plunge you into this. As I said, your father in many ways is literally the originator, the novel, the beginning of your story. And of the many tapestry of people who, ended up making you who you are, you often go back again and again to your father and mother. They were really, all of us, I suppose, have very large influences, but they were extraordinary people. So for the audience, pick out bits which tell how extraordinary your father was, and why was his journey so original and different?
My father was, he was a professor. He taught English at the Punjab University Hindu College in Amritsar. But before all that happened, he had studied at Government College Lahore. He'd done his master's in English literature. But when he came, after finishing his studies, he thought of himself as a businessman. So he started to experiment with business. Okay, so the first experiment was he decided to manufacture pencils. It was a total disaster. Not whatever number of pencils that must have been produced there in that factory, not one got sold, he told me. And then something stranger he took up. He started making katoris. So these were such strange things when I didn't know about this when I was little, when I was a baby. But later, when he spoke to me about his escapades with business, these were the disastrous decisions he had taken. And he didn't want to be, a teacher. He said, वो 200-300 रुपए महीने के मिलेंगे, उसमें क्या होगा? I have a family. So, but the pencil factory and the katori factory was such huge monumental disasters that finally somebody, one of his friends, put sense into him and said, this is what you know, this is what you love, why wouldn't you do it? English is your subject, literature is what you want to do, and why wouldn't you finally? But he kept Pitaji, I call him Piti, because as a child I couldn't say the full Pitaji. तो Piti ही रहा सारी जिंदगी. तो वो experimental nature उनकी चलती रही. He's always looking for, newer things. For example, he got so interested, apart from the fact that he didn't want to be another Sharma ji walking down the streets of Amritsar. So he said, I don't want this name, I'm going to find a name for myself. So Naval ho gaya. Then all this, this horrible things happened in between, and then once he started working, he eventually was head of the English department, and he was very revered as a professor by his students. But in between, his experiments continued. He got very fascinated with planchette once. He was always fascinated by the supernatural or the spiritual world, always very fascinated. There was an uncle of mine, he was a family friend called Gyani ji. तो ज्ञानी जी और पिताजी का जो रैपो था वो इतना अमेजिंग था. Every evening after dinner we would go for after dinner walks. So we would cross the Bhandari bridge and go to that, they would all go to that पान वाला दुकान, and till then वहाँ तक तो चढ़ाई चढ़ के नीचे उतर के पान की दुकान तक तो जाना ही है. So they would be discussing the origin of words. So these are the things I was fed with, as a child.
Yeah,
कि वो ज्ञानी जी और पिताजी आगे चल रहे हैं. Mama has me and Didi with her, and we are just walking a few steps behind. But we are constantly hearing about the origin of words. Etymology was one of his favorite subjects, and he couldn't stop discussing that.
I must share with the audience that talking about seance and the supernatural, even that fell prey to the dynamics between our husband and wife, because one evening when he was taking too long to come back into the bedroom, and they were trying to call spirits, Deepti writes about how her mother sat up in bed and started praying fervently ki, please don't let the spirit come, please don't let the spirit come.
She started chanting, aaj spirit nahi aayegi, no spirit will come tonight, spirit will not come tonight.
And it actually didn't.
He came up and Mama said, so spirit aayi fir? And he said, nahi, aaj nahi aayi. So Didi and I, we just duck inside our quilts and we are giggling.
But Deepti, I wanted to draw you a little bit. So we are looking at your origins as well. And in so many ways, all of this went into the clay pot that made you an artist. So, and as I was saying that, this kind of innocent, nostalgic trip down, in many ways is a portrait of our country also, and all of us who are born at least in the 60s and 70s would remember those desultory afternoons, lethargic, sleepy, very full of sound and memories. And Deepti's book is full of that. But as I said, it becomes a portrait of the country as well. And in that, I wanted you to particularly share, because it reminds us of the kind of leadership there was, the newness with which the country was, really taking birth, that your father, in his search for a life of consequence, as he put it, went out seeking Rorik in the mountains, So can you talk about that and how he got Rabindranath Tagore and Nehru and others into his little tiny book project? That's a story worth hearing.
Yeah, there's a chapter in the book which I call Joy of Art. Now he was in Manali. And he was a student. He'd come from Lahore or Chutiyon ke liye, and he heard that Nicholas Roerich, a Russian painter, was living here in exile, and immediately things started happening, and he wanted to meet this painter, this Russian painter. So he wrote a letter. The letters would be hand delivered. Patli Kool se kisi ke haath se chitti upar ja rahi hai. And then Rorik sends a letter back, says, yes, sure, please come. I will send a mule. And he says, no, I'm going to talk about art. How can I go there sitting on a mule? So he started the walk, and the walk was endless. 3 o'clock, by the time he reached, Rorik's family were already sitting. They'd given up on him. They were sitting having their lunch, and then he was invited in. And he sat there, and he talks about these little observations of how Mrs. Rorik, Helena Rorik, was in her gown, the Russian gown she was wearing, and the way this lunch was being served. There were waiters around, and कोई plate रखता था तो कोई और उठा के ले जाता था, कोई चम्मच ला के रख रहा है. All these little details he gave me, and he was of course floundering on the with his kanta churi and all that. Then Rorik asks him to stay the night. When they start talking about art, sitting in the veranda. I think a lot of you may have even seen the Nagar Rorik Museum. Okay, doesn't matter. There's this very old English cottage, colonial style, very sweet little cottage where Rorik lived. And they're talking about art, and late into the evening, and then it's time for him, he realized that he has to get back to Patli Kool, and then he has to go back. And then Rorik said, okay, you stay. He said, but I don't have, I've not brought any clothes with me. He said, no, you wear my clothes. Rorik was so tall, and my father was tiny. My father was floating. I mean, those pajamas that he wore, वो टांग में तो आ गए, बाकी का आधा वो फ्लोर के ऊपर.
He got to wear a Russian gown as well.
So then, for this journal, which he used to bring out, called Joy of Art, he got Rabindranath Tagore to write the introduction. There were
that's what
Chuktai's sketches are there. I mean, a young boy of age 20 in college in Lahore, he was pretty enterprising, and he was quite, if he would decide something, he would just go out and seek that and make that happen. So later, as when he decided at the age of 48, when he decides, sorry, am I interrupting?
No, not at all.
Yeah, when he decides to, when all the other colleagues of his in Hindu college, they are planning कि मसूरी में retire करके रहेंगे या Dalhousie में रहेंगे, he takes $12 in his pocket and he migrates to America, and he wants to start his life all over again with his wife and children in tow. So that, those are my father has been a huge inspiration for me always, and somebody who always said, you can study, you can keep learning till the end of your life. Keep studying, go back to school. So what if you're 55 or 70 or 85? As long as you have life, you have दिमाग है, आंखें हैं, पढ़ते रहो, कुछ और नया सीखते रहो.
That's amazing. And as I said, that to me, a lot of later he writes another book called Work Study. And a little detail that Deepti didn't share with you, but which really struck me, was that he reached out to Rabindranath Tagore, not someone he knows, but because Rorik has written this essay for his journal. And actually, Gurudev passed away before the book could be published, and he was really crestfallen. But it turned out that Tagore had actually written the foreword before he died, because he had promised, and so he did that. Those are kind of throwbacks to, as I said, the formative years of our country. But the other person I wanted to, and you also didn't mention when you said he was constantly looking for this searching and learning, yes, that at age 65 he finished his PhD on linguistics, So he went back to university and actually got a PhD in linguistics.
Yes, in New York, yes.
So all of us who are feeling beat up and done for at age 50, we know कि आज 40 साल बाकी है. The other person I wanted you to give insights on, And again, because I found that it was a reflection of the country itself, was your mother and your grandmother. You know, recently I was speaking to Indira Jaising, and she was describing her, you know, college years, and she said the default mode at that time for women was to be feminists, you know, and it was an unconscious, even before the label came. She said because India was coming into independence, we were all part of protest movements, we were all part of public life, and she said, so for all of us to be a feminist was literally in your blood, you know. And I found that really interesting when I was reading about your mother and your grandmother.
Grandmother, my dadi. Yes.
Your dadi, but even your mother was you know, searching for things.
Yes.
So do speak about both these towering women in your life.
Yes, my dadi was, you know, my dada dadi, I would call them, Bauji was my dada, and my dadi, we called her Bibiji. So Bauji and Bibiji had a very amazing equation. He was a Qatar Jansangi and she was a Qatar Congressee. Staunch, both were. And
you can see the fault lines back then.
and they had this wonderful marriage, you know. They would sit across the table, you know, when they sat for their meals, they would both discuss each other's point of view. इनका point of view जो कुछ वहाँ पे elections नहीं, but कुछ छोटे-छोटे कुछ होते रहते थे, you know, political involvement जिसमें इनका रहता था. They would discuss.
WhatsApp नहीं थी तो बात होती थी ना.
बात होती थी.
झगड़ा नहीं होती थी.
हाँ. And they were perfectly okay with each other's views, which were completely contrary. There was never any issue. There was never any clash or anything. My dada was a criminal lawyer, one of the leading criminal lawyers of Amritsar, and dadi, she had matriculated in the year 1920 something, पता नहीं. जिस ज़माने में कोई लड़कियाँ मैट्रिक तक तो पहुँचती ही नहीं थी. They would hardly go to school, you know. So to get an education like that and then to be called later a Sanskrit scholar, all that was very things that really impacted me as a child. And she was a very active social worker. एक तो child marriage को रोकने के लिए उन्होंने बहुत काम किया, and then destitute women के लिए बहुत काम किया. I always grew up with this story कि हमारे घर में 17 girls were adopted at different stages over the years. 17 लड़कियों को पाला पोसा, उनको पढ़ाया लिखाया और फिर उनके कन्यादान भी किए. So this was a story, and my father, because my mother was a refugee from Burma and then from Lahore, my father took 1 rupee as token dowry when he married Mama.
So, Deepti, you know, it's fascinating because we're all also of that era. There was the whole influence of being convent bred, and the nuns and the Jesuit brothers played a big role. And so Deepti is not really the Deepti Naval of Amritsar, she's the Deepti Naval of Ambershire, you know, which is...
Ambershire, like Yorkshire and other, you know. Yeah. Our nuns wouldn't allow us to speak Punjabi. So जब हम बात करते थे, तो Amritsar, when a nun is passing, it will become Ambershire.
Yeah. So that colonial mind, you know, we were all really colonized. But that's not the reason I was going to ask you that. I was saying that, you know, I want to bring you to the time of partition and Amritsar, Lahore, all the, you know, the various wars that your family and the country went through. But before that, you know, you describe a very modern relationship between your father and your mother. You know, she was a woman of taste, of art. She would paint. She wanted to be an actress or a theater actress. So they had a very equal relationship. And then later in the 70s, they parted ways and divorced. You know?
They split.
Could you talk to us about that? Because in many ways, that's again, how was it that they were still looking for themselves at age 70? What made them separate and divorce? And you said it became a big fault line in your life.
Yeah. It impacted me greatly. My parents' split was something that I could not deal with. I mean, I went through my own divorce and I was able to deal with it. I was, you know, great friends with my ex-husband, and we are great equation today. But my parents splitting was something that came later. Of course, I had seen signs of that when I was a child. I grew up thinking that my parents have the ideal marriage. They would sit in the sunlit veranda, discussing Byron and Keats and sharing so much of, literature. I would always hear these conversations between both of them. And going for outings, taking us always to the Kulu Valley, and Mama will pull out her, oil paper and be making landscapes, and Pitaji would be with his book and reading, and Didi and I playing in the water, khad pe, ye wo, So from that kind of from that picture perfect kind of a thing to have memory of a discord between my parents, which I have written about. I didn't go into the detail because at that time, I have been true to my childhood only in this book. I have not put in things that later were revealed to me because I just wanted to stay true to all my reactions as a child, keeping in mind what I knew, what I was aware of at that time, what I was exposed to. So the book has a couple of, these memories of mine where I could see that there's some trouble between them, but I couldn't, as a child, I was too small. I couldn't figure out what it was, and we couldn't do anything about it. It was just something that instilled a deep fear in me. And that fear was that things don't really, maybe not meant to last. Anything which looks perfect may not last. And that impacted my later life and, my own relationships. I could never really feel completely secure within, a relationship. तो वो impact तो उसका बहुत ज़बरदस्त बाद में रहा, and I mean it took a lifetime to get over that. My parents split in their 70s. They worked together. They made a life for us and for themselves and for all the three of us, me, my sister, and my younger brother, in America. But when I heard of the split, it was the most devastating thing for me. So that part I have also mentioned in the book. And my mother, like when you said that go with my mother's story a bit. My mother was born and brought up in Burma, Punjabi family. Her father was from Jammu, Dogras from Jammu. He was a Pahari man. He even looked like one, slightly cheekbones and that kind of thing. And my Nani was Punjabi from a village, from a place called Mukeria. And they immediately after they married, they went off to Burma. They migrated, and he was working with the PWD as chief accountant there. The Japanese War, the Second World War happened, and my mother had come back. She had managed to come back, get into a steamer and come to Calcutta and then reach Mukeria. But the family was back there, the whole family. My mother had 7 or 8 siblings. The family could not afford to fly down. The ships, the Japanese had invaded Burma, and there were these torture camps that were set up for the Burmese people, and the Japanese were torturing them. And they said that the Indian people had to flee Burma. They had to get away because they would get all wrapped up in this whole thing that was this ugly phase that was going on. There was bombardments. So much was happening at that time. The Indians, how many? I think a huge amount of, I forget the number, there was a huge amount of Indians that fled Burma and walked over through the Assam hills, Nagaland, Manipur, karte over months, and landed in India. And my family, I write actually a delightful It's my favorite chapter called Little Woman and the Gramophone. My Nani, I called her Badi Mummy. When it was time to leave Mandalay, she said, I can leave everything else behind, but I'm not going to leave my gramophone. She carried the gramophone. I mean, there were coolies and there was help. There was a lot of family members all, you know, on
walking out.
हाँ, bullock carts और कैसे कैसे आए, जैसे जैसे भी बन पाया cross करते करते. But she wouldn't give the gramophone to anybody else. नहीं कि ये कहीं पहाड़ के नीचे फेंक देंगे because it's very heavy. And she was the smallest in the group, you know, tiny woman. She carried it. She brought it. And when I was in New York and for my English class, the first essay that I wrote in my English class in New York, Hunter College, it was this essay about my Nani's walk with that gramophone over the Assam hills. And I called it Little Woman and the Gramophone.
So, you know, Deepti, when you're sharing this story, I wanted to ask you, so I wanted the audience to get a tactile sense of what your family, you know, the fabric of what your family was made of. But in the bigger strands, there's the nature of memory, you know, how identity is formed, how migration and immigrants, you know, identities shift. And your family, in a way, is a product of two partitions. You know, it's their walkover from Burma and here,
then
the
Lahore
partition, the partition
Lahore,
of India and Pakistan.
Lahore too,
So, you know, and there again, I saw many foundational sort of fault lines for our country as well. You know, when you're saying that you end up being a story that you choose for yourself, talk of those two very different episodes, you know, of Jalalabad and of your own grandmother being saved by a Tongawala.
My mother.
Your mother. That, you know, that the country could have chosen either of those stories. And for that period, which one did we choose and why? You know, so do share that.
Yeah. Lahore riots, Lahore riots had started earlier. Amritsar, it took 4 months for people in Amritsar to start retaliating. You know, so my mother's family was in Lahore. My father had already moved back to Amritsar. Because my house, the house where I grew up, it was just next to the mosque, Khairuddin's mosque, and on the terrace where I used to sleep every night, we could look inside the mosque. It was overlooking, you know, the mosque. So, but during partition, it was all fine during my time. We had no problem. It was a deserted mosque. कोई था नहीं वहाँ, बस कबूतर बोलते थे वहाँ वो mosque, our house got burnt down, attempted to be burnt thrice. जब पता चला कि अमृतसर जो है वो रहेगा, पाकिस्तान का हिस्सा बन जाएगा, which means thrice the house got burnt. Once it got burnt by the Muslims, it was built by a Muslim. There were two brothers. One built the mosque, the other built the house. So Hindus burnt it, though Pandit Gyanchand Sharma ji was living there, the lawyer, the criminal lawyer, my grandfather. But the Hindus burnt it, saying they colored it, they marked it with the green paint and said, "Ye to Muslim property hai." So it was, you know, they tried to burn it down, and then the Muslims tried to burn it down because Panditji is always trying to save the Hindus. You know, some crazy stories like that. When this family, my father's family, they were told in good time, the third attempt, कि आपका घर जलाने वाले हैं आज, आप फैमिली को लेके पंडित जी यहाँ से निकल जाइए. So there was my father's, my dada dadi, my father, his sisters, all they got hold of, they had a tonga, and रात को कर्फ्यू लगा हुआ है, हॉल गेट से वो टोंगा लेकर के धीरे धीरे वो निकल रहे हैं. Now when you get to the Bandari bridge, the tonga cannot pick up speed. You have to get down and walk along with the tonga till you reach up, and then there was a jatha of Muslims, group of men with पट्टे बांधे हुए माथे पे, and they हाथ में वो तलवारें हैं. They saw this family, they saw this jatha coming towards them. And they thought कि अब बस ये last है, अब जान खत्म है, इसके बाद नहीं, हम नहीं रहेंगे. At that time, a bus came, the bus which was coming from Lahore, and there was a bus stop right outside of Hall Gate. So that bus is coming down Bhandari Bridge, and it's parking itself near outside of Hall Gate. And this group realized these are refugees coming from Lahore, so there are many more Hindus here in the bus, so let's go for that. And they dropped the idea of this family and they moved towards the bus. And then my father describes it that as we caught up with the Tonga going up, and we got back on the Tonga and moved away, saving our lives, we heard shrieks of women, men, and children. So along with this story, I heard all these kind of stories. So many of them are in my book also, but my favorite story, which I had saved for the last bit, because I didn't want to end this chapter on this kind of a note. My Dadaji's village called Jalalabad also suffered the same kind of thing. 300 Hindus and about 1,000 Muslims there. The Hindus were all cordoned and taken to the Bias riverbank and were all butchered in one night, all gone. So Dadaji fought with a vengeance for the Hindus who had participated in the riots, but because he thought, बचपन से लेकर अब तक मैं जिसको भी जानता था वो सब खत्म हो गए एक ही झटके में. So he started fighting to save all the Hindus, but he went. There came a point when he had to take into stock what he was doing. He said, I'm saving the Hindus, I'm doing it for my country, for my people, but what am I doing? ये हिंदुओं ने जिन मुसलमानों को मारा है वो तो इनोसेंट थे, उन्होंने तो इनकी फैमिली में किसी को नहीं मारा था. ये तो टिट फॉर टैट वाली बात है. लाहौर में आपने मेरी फैमिली को कत्लेआम कर दिया, हम यहाँ पे आपकी फैमिली को मार देंगे. So he said, he actually gave up the profession of law. He gave up the profession, he took to the scriptures, and he only stayed with that till the end of his life. He left Amritsar, he moved to Chandigarh, the newly built city of Chandigarh at that time, and he only took to the scriptures. Ye father ki side pe hua. On my mother's side, the families, they are stuck in a place called Ichra. Ichra was a densely Muslim locality, and there was most of the Hindus had already fled. They had already left and they were leaving. But इनको ना टांगा, ना कोई कार, ना कोई टैक्सी तो होती नहीं होगी. उस ज़माने में टांगा, रिक्शा ऐसे ही कुछ होते होंगे. इनको कोई गाड़ी ना मिले जाने के लिए, और चिक्स होती थी घर में, वो उसके बीच में से स्लैट्स में से देखते थे कि कोई पास कर रहा हो तो हमें लगे कि कोई औरत ने बिंदी लगाई है या कोई आदमी ने धोती पहनी है, तो हम जाके उनको कहें, भैया हम भी यहाँ छुपे हुए हैं, हमें भी निकालिए. And that's my favorite stories of this old Muslim tangawala who hid 3 Hindu girls under gunny bags. उसके टांगे के पीछे ऊपर तूड़ी वूड़ी डाल के और gunny bags के बीच में 3 छोटी लड़कियों को, छोटी means young teenage girls, उनको बिठा के ऊपर ऐसे camouflage करके he brought them out of the riot-torn Ichra Mohalla and took them all the way through the night to the safety of a refugee camp. That's how my mother was. My mother was one of them. So I mean, these kind of stories, there are both, है ना? Stories तो पहले तो हम जब छोटे थे तो we had, हमें तो कहा जाता था कि it's always them who are cruel, who did all the killing. They are always them. वो लोग ऐसे थे, वो लोग. My Raj auntie, who used to be my neighbor, she sat me down one day and she told me the real facts. दोनों तरफ से कत्लेआम हुआ है. Please don't be under any wrong impression कि वो लोग बड़े जालिम हैं, उन्होंने हमारे यहाँ ऐसा किया वैसा किया. And I mean, I remember I was so impacted by the realization that Hindus and Sikhs have done the same atrocities on Muslims, which we hear कि उन्होंने बड़े ये किया वो किया. I mean, you know, those stories were, I mean, all that is part of my childhood, all the stories. Being in Amritsar, you cannot escape stories of partition. Every house, every family has history of partition.
Yeah, but you know, Deepti, the reason I brought that up, obviously in a time of polarization like we are in now, that as I was saying that in that milieu, there were two potential stories that one could have chosen. You know, one was a story of hatred and revenge and anger. And yet, whether in your family or it so turns out that Deepti's mother and my granduncle, B.C. Sanyal, who was a painter in Lahore, they also came across in partition.
Yes.
You know, Snehalata Sanyal, his wife. They were all actually products of the partition generation. Left behind everything, you know, and the reason she spoke of that gramophone, it's again, which brings back to us how harsh that uprooting was, you know, how people left behind all these memories that Deepti is relishing of her childhood. People were uprooted from all of that. But the point in her book, and I'm of course extrapolating it, is that there was that choice that your parents' generation could have made. And by and large, in a time of such turmoil and, you know, terrible bloodshed, the choice that a majority of people made was to live with forgiveness and peace, you know, and that's the story that everyone told of themselves.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Yes, I remember the time when I was little, about 4-5 years old, and the first azan sounded from the masjid. पहली बार, मतलब हम वो मस्जिद जो बिल्कुल बेजार उजाड़ रहती थी और कबूतर बोलते थे वहाँ से जब पहली अजान स्टार्ट हुई, and it happened 10 years after the partition. 47 में partition हुआ, 57 में पहली अजान वहाँ से सुनाई पड़ी, and people opened their windows and they धीरे धीरे खिड़कियाँ खुलने लगीं और वो देखने लगे, and then it was okay. Then it became part of our life. I mean, you know, I found those memories so beautiful from my childhood, you know, really.
You know, it's so odd, Deepti, that those who were actually tied by terrible loss and tragedy, up until our parents' generation, you heard so many stories of old friends going and meeting each other, and you know, tears and shared memories and love, and you know, that, like you said, neighbors were suddenly killing each other, and yet what remained was a terrible sense of loss and friendship, you know, so that when people met again, and strangely, it's now when there's less, you know, less immediate hatred or need for hatred, that people are able to hate much more easily, you know. So it's really powerful to read. People who actually suffered hate less than...
actually, the people who actually suffered.
Yeah.
वो फिर भी forgiving, वो फिर भी okay, we have to, you know, get on with lives. वो बुरा वक्त था, टल गया, चलो, बहुत बुरा वक्त था.
Yeah. So coming back to the stories that we tell of ourselves, Deepti, now let me bring you into how we know you, you know, as the actress of Chashme Buddoor and Mirch Masala.
I've written a lot about my films, बचपन की फिल्मों के बारे में बहुत.
So tell us, you know, as I was saying that her father birthed in her the idea of living a life of consequence. Yeah. So tell us now about your identity formation, that when you talk about your identity as an artist and as a person, what became the founding ideas for you, and, you know, talk about some of the things that made you Deepti.
See, when Mama used to be narrating to me her growing up years in Burma, she would talk a lot about Devika Rani, Kanan Bala, the singer, Betty Davis. She had her fixations, wo unke the. And she wanted to be like one of them. She used to call herself the beauty queen of Bengal. Mama was very beautiful. She used to call, and she knew it, she used to call herself the beauty queen of Bengal. Because she thought, because Kanan Bala, वो रिकॉर्ड जो वो ग्रामोफोन जो था उसके साथ बहुत से भजन्स वो रोज़ शाम को सुनते थे. Mama thought that all Bengali girls have long hair, big eyes and lovely voices, singing voices. They sing very beautifully. So she wanted, because she wanted, so these stories, thinking of my mother as, you know, hearing कि वो अपने आप को ऐसे समझती थी, वो ऐसे करती थी, वो ड्रामा करती थी और वो एक्टिंग करती थी. I've seen her perform in Chitra Talkies with Bhagwan Dada and Shama and not Narupa Roy, Achla Sachdev. So I have some memories of seeing my mother perform, but they are just 2 or 3 memories. लेकिन वो stories जो थी वो सुनाती थी, वो तो चलती रहीं, वो तो मेरे पूरे growing up years में चलती रहीं. And I somewhere it came from there. That is the birth of my desire to be an actor. I think it stems from there, Mama's stories. And of course, when I was about 11, my father took me, because he was a great Tagore enthusiast. So he took me to see Kabuliwala because he said, वो रविंद्रनाथ टैगोर की स्टोरी पे बनी है, we should go. तो हम लोग काबुलीवाला देखने गए, and I remember I was 9 and then Minnie was 9 and Kabuliwala was this, you know, this wonderful creature who just loves this little girl so much. 2 years later, when I was 11, my father brings गांधी ग्राउंड में प्ले हो रहा है इप्टा वालों का. इप्टा वाले आए हैं बॉम्बे से. there's a play Balraj Sahni is going to perform. And immediately I say, Kabuliwala. So that meeting, not meeting really, वो crowd में, I'm this little tiny thing, इतने जाट लोग खड़े मेरे आसपास, बीच में से निकल के, how am I going to get to Balraj Sahni and get my autograph? But I carried my autograph book. And I managed to get an autograph from him. And he did sign, and he said that if I keep signing autographs, my dear, I'm going to miss my train. तो मुझे वो my dear क्या बोल दिया, मुझे लगा ओ ये तो हमारे अपने ही हैं. देखा, he called me, he looked at me, he signed, he was looking down at me, he signed in my autograph book. तो वो, those are the early influences. Then my cousin, my cousin brother, we call him इंदू भैया, वो एक्टर बनना चाहते थे. वो जिद करके फैमिली से काफ़ी ऑपोजिशन यू नो फेस करके वो गए बॉम्बे, थोड़ी सी फिल्में की, आ गए. It was a bit of a failure for him, but these were the initial seeds. You know, इंदू भैया putting this in my head, sadhana ko jana hai, sadhana ko. And I had that fringe that sadhana cut. All the girls at that time had sadhana cut.
That's the era when cinema was, like you said, everything was a heightened imagination.
Yes,
you know,
सिर्फ फिल्में ही तो थी. You know, entertainment. There was no TV. There was no TV at home. 70 में TV. By the time we were on our way to America. You know, so there was just films. I grew up on commercial cinema, Hindi films, commercial, total. और बाद में जाकर के art cinema बाद में हुआ, but yeah.
Yeah, no, so I was asking you that, you know, we've been trying to define what are the stories your parents defined for themselves. What's the story India defined for itself? Yes. So what is the story that ended up, if you talk of 3 or 4 cardinal ideas that define who you are as Deepti, what are those ideas? You know, what was the value system that is fundamental to you now?
I have been very often, far too often been called the girl next door. And I really think that the girl next door really needs to be redefined. We cannot, we cannot think of the girl next door as somebody who's wishy-washy, जिधर circumstance ले गए वहाँ पहुँच गए, और वो कुछ अपना, she doesn't have अपना say, अपनी voice नहीं है, बहुत बीबी लड़की है. मतलब ये जो क्लीशे है, इसको destroy करना पड़ेगा. You have to redefine the girl next door as somebody who knows her mind, somebody who's ready to take chances with life, somebody who's ready to experiment, who has the grit to do it her way, which is the right way for her, and never give up her dream.
Yeah.
That is the girl next door. So this is what I always thought. I mean, some, people say, oh, you're so sweet, so simple. Simplicity is my style statement. Yeah. It is.
I was just going to say, Deepti, that even being a woman, I would be very delighted to have a girl next door who looks like you, So that's, you're an absolute vision in this, So, yeah, but I get what you mean, that this condescension with which people say that, oh, that's a girl next door.
Yeah. They say, बहुत वो पिछड़ा हुआ एक image है. We need to undo that. I was telling Shoma that let's read something to give you a little flavor of the book. Do you want to read, or should
Yes, no, you
should
should read. Yes, absolutely.
I would like to read. I must tell you, as a child, I lived there. I was a very introvert child. You may not believe it when you read the book, because there's so much going on, but a lot was going on internally. And I had a pretty good imagination. There is a chapter in the book called My Imaginary World. So I want to give you a little bit of that.
Yeah, sure. Just while Deepti is looking for the passage of her imaginary world, let me continue sharing anecdotes of her life, because when she wanted to redefine what it means to be the girl next door, one of the things she did at 13 was that she had been watching movies which were shot in Kashmir, and she decided that she didn't want this pedestrian life that she was leading. So at 13, she got onto a train and went off to Kashmir, She tried to. She almost
I almost got there, but Pathankot station par hi pakad ke kaan se वापस.
What I find fascinating about this whole, clique of actors from art cinema particularly, Nasiruddin ran away when he was 14 years old. You ran away. All of you were trying to leave behind the ordinariness of your life and seek something else.
Yes. I was, हर फिल्म में कश्मीर में शूटिंग होती थी, वहीं गाने गाते थे सब लोग, और this was not right, such beauty over there, and here you're sitting in Katra Sher Singh.
कबूतर के बीच.
So I just decided कि मैं कश्मीर जा रही हूँ, मैं बस, and I'm sorry, it's the most embarrassing, but I decided कि if I don't tell that, then I'm being really dishonest about my childhood. I have to spill the beans, ना बताना ही पड़ेगा ना कि कितने हद तक बेवकूफ़ थे. क्या करें? There was in the book I talk a lot about, I describe characters that lived around me. There was this whole, we used to call, जब refugees आए पाकिस्तान से, तो एक cobbler clan था, पूरा राजस्थान से आया था, और वो लोग आके मस्जिद में बस गए पहले. I think they stayed there for a few months, 7-8 months, and then Waqf board says, no, this is not a dwelling place. आप यहाँ पे अपने कपड़े सुखा रहे हो और ये कर रहे हो, खाने बना रहे हो. Find a place, go find, पूरा शहर पड़ा है. So that's when my grandfather opened up the area to the back of the house, Chandravali house it was called, और वहाँ पे वो लोग सब जाके उन्होंने अपनी झुग्गी झोंपड़ियाँ, now it's all concrete, but we used to call it, because वो मोचियों का मोहल्ला था, it came to be known as the Mochi Gali, but we gave it a name, we called it Mochistan, after the Pakistan, तो मोचिस्तान पीछे था, उसमें सारे characters वो भी मेरी किताब में हैं. The boys that played with us, वो गेट, बहुत बड़ा सा गेट था, वो गेट के बाहर वो गुल्ली डंडा खेलते थे और कभी वो कंचे खेलते थे और इस तरह के. And we used to be inside. होली के टाइम पर पिचकारियाँ लेकर के वो लोग सारे छोटे छोटे टॉडलर्स वो खड़े हो जाते थे, रंग बिरंगी पिचकारियाँ, और हम गेट के अंदर से होली खेलते थे. It was a strange world. It was charming like hell. It was so crazily charming, that world, believe me. There's a woman, there was a buffalo shed right across the gate, or Shani's buffaloes. तो मैंने वो buffaloes को ना नाम दिए हुए थे सब अपने, मुझे I had named each one. एक का नाम था चाली, एक ब्राउनी, एक भूरी, एक गंगो, इस तरह के मैंने अपने नाम I could identify each one of them.
That sounds a more innocent Gaushala than what we have now. Dipti, I want to take you through some other strands. So quickly, we're running out of time.
Okay. So should I read or should I?
Yeah, you should read. Read a short passage.
There was a woman called Bay. She was an old lady. She petite. She wore this white salwar kameez पहनती थी, सर के ऊपर मलमल का दुपट्टा. She lived in the corner. हमारा घर से right corner पे वो ऊपर के floor पे रहती थी. तो I chose to, in my imaginary world, I chose to uproot her from there and plant her on the top terrace of my own house. And I called her Bebe. I would refer to her with myself as Bebe. So I'll read a little bit. Bebe sat on the terrace of the Chandravali house at its outermost corner, from where she could see children playing on other terraces, rickshaws pulling in and out of the bazaar, and Shani's buffaloes returning home at dusk. Once in a while, she'd move her hands to fix her shawl over her head and take off her eyeglasses to wipe them with the corner of her dupatta. Until the sun went down and there was light enough to see, Bebe sat and watched life beneath. After dark, when she couldn't see the world in the diminishing light, she would turn inwards and shift her gaze across the chajja towards the yellow street lamps flickering in the deserted lanes of Katra Sher Singh. Once the electric bulbs lit up in the small dingy shops, she'd then lift her legs off the ledge one at a time and step her way down to see life at close quarters. Slowly, she slipped inside her brown velvet quilt dotted with yellow flowers. It had started to drizzle silently. Outside the wet square balcony of her room, she could see the empty street where Pa was a madman. Pa is like Prava. You say na Pa, Paiya, aise bolte na. Pa was this crazy man who lived under our thada of our house, where Pa danced about his shadow under the yellow lamp post. The mochis in their labyrinthine world played on the dholak and manjira till late into the night. Short gusts of wind swept the dark streets. Bit of this and I will read from...
Deepti, should we end with you reading?
Yeah,
I want to open it up to the...
We may not have time to read.
It's so, too fragmented for them to understand the feeling of it.
I would love to just make conversation. Yeah.
So I'm going to open this up. When we circle back after the questions, I want to end with asking you that, your book is a very idealized memory of childhood. So my last question, after everyone's asked you, just for you to think about it, is that why did you write this? And that ultimately in that idealized world, there was a partition, between your parents and that fault line in your own self.
Yes.
So that takes you beyond childhood to the adult world. We are living in the adult version of India now. So I want you to examine that fault lines in your life after everyone's had their say. So let me open this up for questions. Yeah, sure.
Yes, I can hear you. Let everyone...
let you get a mic.
Just give her the... Can you give her the mic?
She just started.
Can you give her the mic?
Hi.
Hi.
You look gorgeous. And my friends and I, we were talking, how can somebody be so timeless? So it's a pleasure. You are a vision, like she said. My question is, you're such an accomplished actor, such an accomplished artist. Why write a book? What was the thought, the trigger to write a book?
I always thought of myself as a writer. I did. I used to write poetry when I was in school. I wrote my first book called Lamha Lamha, which is written in Hindustani. And I started writing that when I was still in New York. And I thought, why should I write in English? Hamari apni zaban hai, Urdu. Because I grew up in Amritsar, so I was fascinated by the Urdu language. You know, Lahore radio sun ke how you are so attuned to that, the sound of the Urdu language. I wanted to write in Urdu. So the first book was in Urdu. Then I wrote my second book of poems came later, much later, called Black Wind and Other Poems, and that was in English because I thought, no, bas ho gaya. Ab let's come back to अपना जो दिमाग में जैसे आता है वैसे लिखेंगे.
Deepti of Ambershire.
So, and then I wrote a book of short stories called The Mad Tibetan Stories from Then and Now. I always thought I always thought I will write, always.
Brilliant, thank you, incredible.
Anjali.
Hi, I just want to ask something a little different. I loved your stereotype about you having to be the girl next door always, and how that's completely wrong. So I think we live in a world of stereotypes. Like, I think, so I'm from the corporate world, and that has its own stereotype, right? So how do you think, did you have to live true to that stereotype, or did you break free from it? And where do you think now, especially for women, how we're breaking out of it? Because we really need to.
I didn't have to live through the stereotype at all, at all. It's my screen image. That was the initially my screen image, which became such a success that, you know, you got stuck with that image of the sweet girl next door. I did several roles later, where I played these very quietly strong, internally strong women like Panchwati, Ankahi, Main Zinda Hoon. So many films that I can even a commercial film like Ye Ishq Nahi Aasan. These women knew, the Sadhvi of Panchwati, she's not looking for, वो अपना अस्तित्व नहीं ढूंढ रही, उसे पता है वो कौन है. She's just, you know.
And I'm just going to add to it. So today, if you look at movies, right, do you think the stereotyping of women has actually broken down and it's less, if not gone?
Meeta? Do you want to say something? Give her the mic. No, stereotype, I think, yeah, broken down, no? Yeah. There's another kind of stereotype again, which may have cropped up, which I don't want to go into right now. Okay. Yeah, because this
sure,
is another debate.
This is a long topic.
Yeah.
So of all the movies and the works that were mentioned, one series that was deeply influential in my childhood was Thoda Sa Asman.
Oh yes.
So
yes.
it was about 3 women who were
Yes.
very strong, and
Yes.
it just taught me, you know, so I would look forward to every Wednesday, I think it was Wednesday, that was aired on Doordarshan, and you know, it taught about how to handle life. And
Yes.
I thought it was a huge influence on me. So could you just share a little bit about the series?
Yes, all the 3 women. There are 3 women in Thoda Sa Asman, 20, 40 and 60. Now all the 3 women come from middle class, okay? And they all have, they're all somehow, they come together at a point when they are asserting their identities. They are fighting what is not right for them. They are fighting their battles. Each one of them is fighting a battle to be her own person. The teenage girl or the married woman and the older woman, this Nadira Appa played that. So people loved that actually. They said, "Whoa, that is such a lesson in living." Thoda Sa Asman. I mean, I don't know if the men liked it because it is a bit of a bold theme, you know. A woman, a 40-year-old woman who's pregnant, she leaves her husband and walks out of home because there's physical violence in that marriage. When it comes to that point, she says, "No, not anymore. Bas, this is where we stop." You know, she's trying and trying and trying, and she says, "No more." So that kind of thing, you know, and the 60-year-old woman who finds out that her husband always had a woman in Pune. She's living in Bombay. And when that person, when that woman dies, she gets a telegram saying, Mrs. Joshi passed away, come quickly. She says, but I'm Mrs. Joshi. That was a fascinating chapter in that, in Thoda Sa Asman. When she says, at 60, I'm going to be on my own now. Now I'm not going to live with you because last 40 years of my life has been a lie. I mean, reaction, they later become friends and that happens later. But yes, there's a man who wants to ask it. Thoda Sa Asman ke bare mein to nahi hai na? नहीं aap kariye back.
I have the mic, so sorry. Yeah.
Sorry,
Give him the mic.
The mic?
I have
there.
the mic, sorry. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
yes.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Two generations who are fans, myself and my mom. Yeah, she insisted. Simple question. We've grown up on films like Katha and Chashme Buddoor.
Yeah.
Can we make those films today? Can we make those films without somebody filing a case, somebody doing, sending a tweet, somebody getting arrested? Your thoughts on that?
We can't replicate that innocence of that time. Other things we can manage. बाकी ठीक है, पर वो मासूमियत तो नहीं ला सकते. आज तो everybody knows far too much. Kids are grown up before they even start with their childhood. वो नहीं हो सकता.
Yeah, there's a question here.
Thank you. A major part of the evening was a fascinating journey in how you evolved as a person.
Thank you.
And that is how we have not known you, right?
Yes.
We have known you as the screen star, as a person who inspires, and internally you have had so many heroes and heroines in your own home who have inspired you.
Yes.
And when you become a star, where you are inspiring others, how do you marry these two characters in terms of your internal emotions, and how does it manifest itself in your character as you feel it?
I honestly don't know.
Now you're being the
It's just-
stereotype girl next door, Deepti.
No, because I haven't figured this out. I haven't worked on it. I don't think about it. I just do what I have to do. I just want my creative process to continue. If you are asking me, how do you paint and then write and then act and then direct and do other things, तो वो एक ही चीज़ है वो creative process जो है वो एक ही है. उसके medium कभी ये मिल जाता है तो ये कर लेते हैं. अगर role कोई नहीं मिल रहा है तो लिखने को तो बहुत कुछ है. तो लिखना है. और नहीं है तो पेंटिंग तो करना है. And I cannot sit still. I cannot not keep my creative juices flowing. That is something I'm not capable of.
So basically, we must define you as a multifaceted natural.
Yes, I would be so grateful if I was, if I got rid of this earlier screen image of mine. Yeah. But of course, it gave me a lot of popularity. Yeah.
Again, Hi. So happy to see you. I have seen so many movies while growing up, and your characters that you have played that always inspired me a lot.
Thank
and I'm only having appreciation for you. I've never seen someone so ageless. Like, I was not expecting. You're so beautiful.
I'm 70.
Yes.
Yes.
It's so wonderful to see you and to meet
Going
you
on
today.
18. Thank you. That was a compliment. Thanks.
Is there anything else? I'm just going to take this. Did someone raise a hand there? Sorry.
You can
Just last question and then we'll.
Sorry, where? Did you raise a hand?
Okay, so my question is, you...
Who's speaking?
Hi,
at the back.
Priyankara.
Oh,
You
yeah,
were talking about how, you wanted to write in Urdu because you'd grown up in Amritsar. And then people were saying, while they hate now, and there wasn't hate then. So I wanted to ask you that, the earlier generation had grown up Hindu, Muslim, they're closely interconnected. But the generation after partition, like Saeed Naqvi had also said that he has experience of living with Hindus, but most of the Hindus in India don't have that same experience of living with so many Muslims. And when his brother went to Pakistan, he felt quite uncomfortable with everybody being Muslim. So do you think that it's because the earlier generation, even though something savage and horrific happened, but they were used to living as a community, Muslim and Hindu. But the second generation grew up separated and grew up with tales of horror. So, I mean, I'm asked to ask you that, would you say that?
Yeah, I think, in our home, we were never really, my parents never really fed us with any gory details of stories of partition, massacres, ye wo, bas bahut kam baat hoti thi. It wasn't, they never indulged in that. सुनते बहुत कुछ थे बाहर से, तो हमें कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं थी, in the sense that for us we were not bitter at that time. But I tell you one thing, there was not a single Muslim in Amritsar after partition for those 10 years that I'm talking about. 10 साल के बाद अजान start हुई, people must have started filtering in from Kashmir or somewhere, लेकिन वो सब जा चुके थे. लाहौर में थे, सिख लोग भी थे, हिंदूज भी थे, जो पीछे रह गए थे, लेकिन अमृतसर में कोई नहीं था. आज वो पता नहीं, I don't understand, I don't want to analyze because I'm a little ill-informed about, I've been so busy writing this book for the last 5 years that I really, वो जो हनुमान and honeymoon का भी वो जो किस्सा हुआ है, और मुझे मेरा ही क्लिप सब लोग भेज रहे हैं, what do you have to say to this? I said, wait, I don't know what's going on, I don't know why it was posted in the first place, what was the person trying to say, so if I don't know his intention, I cannot remark. हमने जब बनाई थी फिल्म किसी से न कहना, उसमें हनीमून होटल को हनुमान कर दिया जाता है to hoodwink the father who thinks के भजन सुनने गए हैं.
I think it was, yeah.
So it was as innocent as that. I mean, there was nothing, I don't know about what you're saying. You're asking me a larger question. I'm not that well informed, so I will not be able to comment on that.
Hi, Deepti ji, Pramod here.
Hi, where are you?
So wonderful to see you. Here.
Ha, Pramod,
Yeah.
Yeah, tell me.
Congratulations on your book. And how long did it take you to write the book? That's my first question.
I
5 years.
started working 20 years ago. The first four chapters, the Elbow Crusade, which is all about Eve teasing, how girls in Punjab had to deal with it. It's called the Elbow Crusade. It's one of my favorite chapters in the book. The Pak War, Neeta Devichand, friend of mine. 4 chapters बहुत आसानी से flow में लिख दिए थे, और बड़े-बड़े
And then you had the writer's block.
बाद में फिर I realized that if I want to give the full picture, there's a lot more work that I need to do on this book. So over the years, I was making notes, I was doing research, I was cross-checking family members. I would call people in Australia, in America, auntie, ये वो कोई photo तो होगी. मतलब करते-करते बहुत time लगा. But once Aleph Book Company came in the picture, David Davidar called me and said that we are publishing your book. Then I just had to wake up and say, well, I have to finish writing it. So then rigorous work began. I had to say, I had to avoid doing a lot of other work. I had to say no to some projects which I may have missed out on something good, but वो मुझे ख़त्म करनी थी.
And emotionally, how has it changed you as a person? Vis-a-vis writing the book, were you able to allay some fears?
It tired me out completely. Exhausted me.
Thank you, Deepti ji.
But there's something about, when you say changed me as a person, there's something about recall. There's a realization in recall. When you start putting it down, you always think, मुझे तो बहुत याद है. But when you start putting it down, you realize how much you remember. On the surface, your memory is not so much. But when you start writing it, it starts to unfold. One memory leads to another and so on.
You know, I just wanted to speak to the person who asked about, you know, this separation which has led to, it kind of plays into the chapter of imaginary world, you know, that when you're living together, you know the good and the bad. There's, again, like I keep using this word because her book is like that it's very tactile. But in that chapter, it's about all the figments of your imagination, you know, and when you're not living together with someone, you can fill each other with all the horror stories, all the imagination, and there's no truth that's confronting it, you know. So it's so much easier for us to live with hate now because you don't even know the other person. And any lie can become a truth, you know. So that does play, and that's why I'm going to end now finally,
Yes,
Deepti, as I said. You know, this is a very idealized, it's really like an afternoon, you know, it's like an afternoon from any of our childhoods with the Kabuliwala. That's the metaphor for innocence. But both in your own marriage, in your parents' marriage, you know, they were completely fantastic partners. She supported him through all his mad entrepreneurship and everything. So the book doesn't address it, but today, give us an insight into the fault lines of this idealized world. As I said, that also is a metaphor for our country. So give us insights into what went wrong and what were the fault lines in your own life.
I can't quite go into that because there's a certain sanctity to somebody else's life that I can write this much. As a child, जितना मुझे पता था, वो मैंने लिखा. As an adult, I know much more, but I choose not to talk about that. It's my parents' life. और किसी की marriage में, even if you're a child, you are still an outsider. Even if it's the marriage of your parents, you are an outsider. Only those two people know what exactly went wrong and why. And you can only have your own view of it, which I will never be able to comment
Approximate
on.
it, yeah.
No.
It was interesting.
If I write about my life, like people said, why not an autobiography? Why just a childhood memoir, 400 pages isi mein? I feel that autobiography is, you have to, it's your whole life. Autobiography is your whole life. तो मेरा जो comfort zone है, like my ex-husband Prakash and I are such good friends today. I would never like to go back and rake up things and why? Why would I do that? I would share things that have impacted me. Sensationalism हो जाता है.
Sure.
खुद की लाइफ को लेकर के इसमें जो innocence है, जो ये time है, this was the most splendid years of my life and I always wanted to share these. बाकी तो जिए सब हैं, सब ने देखा है ज़िंदगी को और पता ही है how things go wrong, what can go wrong possibly. You're not going to tell anything any new. So I may not ever be able to write about that, but I will continue to write.
On that note, thank you very much, Deepti.
Thank you, Shoma. Thank you.
You know, because she's titled it as a country called childhood, I'm continually, maybe because I'm so concerned about our country, that I think the most creative act we can do is to, like she has retrieved the innocence of childhood, if we can somehow collectively retrieve the innocence of who and what our country can be, we'd all become artists of life, you know.
Yes, absolutely.
On that note, thank you very much, Deepti.
Thank you,
Thank you
Shoma.
for sharing.
Thank you all. Thank you.